Hello, Sir Ed.
Hey, Kin, good
Hello.
afternoon.
Hello.
Yeah.
All our discussants are here na rin po, sir. And if you'd like, we can start admitting all the participants na. And then maybe we can start officially around 3:02, 3:03. I'm waiting for more participants to come.
Sige, that might be good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We should try to keep to our time. Yeah.
Sige. Ay, Miss Kayona, I'm not sure if I was muted kanina po. So, sige, before I start letting everyone in. So, the official order of discussions will be Archbishop Ledesma, and then Miss Kayona, your second po. And then Prof. Ampi will be the third and last one. Feel free to take as much time as you need. And good luck to everyone. I will start letting everyone in.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. It's 3:05. I think we can now start our food systems webinar. A brief welcome from the organizing committee, the Ateneo de Manila University, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, Ateneo de Davao University, the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. As you may recall, this organizing group started its work in organizing seminars on food systems in preparation for the United Nations Food Systems Summit, which was held in September last year. Today, in fact, marks 1 year since the first independent dialogue was held here in the Philippines, organized by the group. And you will see these reports are uploaded in the Facebook group, in the community page book group that has been started by this working group. This afternoon, we will be focusing on the issue of human rights and the right to food. This is the third in a series of webinars which we have held this semester to be able to focus on different aspects of the food systems. Without further ado, we'll now start. First and foremost, let me just remind everyone of the event guidelines. First, kindly note that the program is being recorded via Zoom and YouTube, and which will be made available publicly. The event is also live streamed via YouTube through this link, https://goateneo.edu FSW Chel-YT. All participants are muted automatically as they enter the meeting room. Throughout the meeting, kindly type in any comments or questions at the chat box. This will include the questions addressed to the discussants, as we'll see later on. There will be an assessment or an evaluation survey at the end of this webinar. Requests for e-certificates will be made available to those who have accomplished the evaluation form, and the link will be made available towards the latter part of the meeting. Can we now maybe start first with the opening prayer?
Prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives that we may protect the world and not prey on it. That we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
All right. Thank you for that opening prayer. This afternoon, before we start, before I introduce, call the first speaker, just a brief note to remind everybody that this has been a series of 3 webinars. No? We've looked at first in February, we organized a food systems webinar with Teddy Bagilat, and we looked at issues related to the environment, the ecology, and to indigenous peoples. And then we organized a second one in March 9, with Sunny Matula, president of the Federation of Free Workers. And we looked at some of the livelihood and employment issues, both for rural and farm and off-farm and related issues, no, in employment. Today, the third in this series, we are going to look at issues related to human rights and the right to food with Attorney Chel Diokno, who is the chairman of the Free Legal Assistance Group, no? Or FLAG as it's known. And these are all important, as this will feed into hopefully policy issues that can be brought up with a new administration, regardless of the outcome of that administration. And these are all works in progress, and hopefully this series of webinars will help inform public opinion as well as academe and people's movements and CSOs, as well as government agencies who are interested to look at food systems as a holistic way of being able to achieve comprehensive food security and nutrition, which is very important. And the right to food is really the starting point, if you like. No? People will recall that in 1948, the United Nations agreed on the Human Rights Charter, and the Philippines is a signatory to that document. Again, in 1974, the Philippines also acceded to the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, which became effective in 1976, no, for all the countries that that agreed to it, no. And the question of the right to food is part and parcel of this document, no, this international treaty, if you like. So really, when we look at the right to food or the human right to food, it is really first and foremost a human right, and it is the right to feed oneself in dignity. I think we should emphasize that. No, it is this right to have continuous access to the resources that will enable all of us to produce, earn, or purchase enough food, and not only to prevent hunger, but also to ensure health and well-being. The right to food only rarely means that the person has the right to free handouts or to grants. Anyway, we'll see this as it unfolds today. To start, to start our webinar, I'd like to first call on our first speaker, who will introduce the webinar. Mr. Ruel Rabanera is currently the Vice President for Social Development of Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan. He was previously Dean of the College of Agriculture in Xavier University. And prior to that, he was also Executive Director of the Asian NGO Coalition for Agrarian Reform and Rural Development in the 90s. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. Ruel Rabanera, Vice President for Social Development, to give us his introductory message. Ruel?
Good afternoon to all our distinguished guests, resource persons, and to all who have registered and logged in to this webinar. Maayong hapon sa inyong tanan. On behalf of Ateneo de Manila University, Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, Ateneo de Davao University, Sustainable Development Solutions Network Philippines, Joint Working Group on Zero Hunger, and Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, I would like to formally welcome you all to this webinar series on sustainable food systems and the future. We started this webinar series in 2021 with various virtual conferences to increase public awareness on the challenges brought about by food insecurity and undernutrition, and to explore sustainable pathways in moving forward. This year, we have organized webinars with potential senators, such as Representative Teddy Bagilat and Attorney Sani Matula. Today, we are privileged to have with us online Attorney Chel Diokno, Chairman of the Free Legal Assistance Group, to reflect on these issues from a human rights perspective. It is recognized that everyone has the right to adequate food and freedom from hunger. This human right, however, is multifaceted, and institutions have approached this from different viewpoints. When problems arise, the immediate reaction for some is to ensure food availability. We experienced this during the initial months of the pandemic when households started backyard gardening or community food production. Everyone becomes a plantito and a plantita. Food accessibility is another major concern for those who do not have gardens to produce their own food. Farmers who have to sustain their livelihood will regard this as an utmost priority as well. Without buyers, their food products are left rotting in the field. The food value chain thus becomes an important consideration. The concern is not only production, but one needs to consider trading, transport, and delivery of food products. Given this producer and consumer relationship, market and pricing become highly significant. Thus, food affordability has to be considered and more often can become restrictive. The food may be available and accessible, but if the price is very expensive, consumers, especially those who are in the margins, may be excluded. Food supply also has to be stable. That is, food should be available and accessible every day, the whole year round. The question is, how have we fared over these years? Globally, FAO reported that there are 811 million chronically hungry people in developing countries in 2020. There are also 3 billion people who cannot access healthy diets simply because they cannot afford it. Thus, it is also vital that the food must be adequate. It must be healthy, nutritious, and culturally acceptable. We Filipinos have a long way to go. And why do I say that? A Filipino child born today is likely to reach only 52% of his or her future potential. 1 in 3 children younger than 5 years old suffered from stunting in 2019, being small in size for their age. Moreover, 19% are underweight for their age, and 6% of children below 5 years old are classified as wasted, being underweight for their height. It is in this context that the right to food is advocated as a basic human right. As early as 1996, the World Food Summit acknowledged the need for a human rights focus on ensuring food security. In 2004, the FAO Council, together with other institutions, including governments and civil society organizations, approved the voluntary guidelines on the progressive realization on the right to adequate food in the context of local food security. It takes into account a wide range of important considerations and principles, including equality and non-discrimination, participation and inclusion, accountability and the rule of law, and the principle that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent. The rights-based approach to development issues in general is needed as it pursues total human development. Thus, the incoming administration can go a long way in integrating food security with other development concerns. Among the essential and commendable guidelines include having a peaceful, stable, and enabling environment in which individuals can feed themselves and their families in freedom and dignity. Establishing legal and institutional arrangements to ensure food safety and consumer protection. Integrating human rights education into school curricula and establishing safety nets to provide for the weakest segments of society. We are hoping that starting with this webinar, the right to adequate food in the context of local food security can be widely disseminated, discussed, and institutionalized towards realizing a hunger-free Philippines in the future. Magandang hapon po uli sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Roel, for that very comprehensive introduction to the webinar and to the issues that face us. And we have seen that Roel has explained also the historical background of the issues, where it's coming from the first World Food Summit of 1996, how the right to food guidelines have been developed and approved in 2004 in Rome, and how the progressive realization of this comprehensive food security is left up to countries and to be able to execute and implement it. This afternoon, we are privileged to have three resource persons, or three discussants, as we call them in this webinar, who will be coming from different perspectives. One has, of course, a very deep understanding of issues related to the church, but has also had practical experience working with farmers and landless workers as an agrarian expert in his earlier life, if you like. The second discussant is really a student. It's a student leader, but who has had experience as a young person dealing with environmental issues. And then our third discussant is a professor from the Ateneo Law School who will look at the rights of the child, primarily, from a human rights perspective. So we have three different resource persons. And so the first is Archbishop Antonio J. Ledesma, SJ, who is the Archbishop Emeritus of Cagayan de Oro, as he retired as Archbishop about 2 years ago. Archbishop Tony has been chair of the CBCP Episcopal Commission on Mutual Relations. He is also a member of the Pontifical Commission for Justice and Peace. And he also chaired the Federation of Asian Bishops Conference Office on Consecrated Life. Is currently a member of the board of the Pax Christi International, and is also a member of the Tripartite Commission of the Bishops Ulama Dialogue Conference. He has had several publications too on various aspects, including basic ecclesial communities, and looking at the Mindanao, the issues of Mindanao from a interreligious perspective, and also with landless workers and farmers. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you, or call to the floor rather, Archbishop Tony Ledesma. Archbishop, please take it away. Archbishop Tony, you're muted.
Mute, but all right.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes. Are you able to show the slides? Maybe can you show the slide?
Kane, will you show this? Who's
We need
Kane,
to
are we
host.
showing the slides from us?
Bishop, Sir Joaquin, can you please show or share the screen, the
Share screen.
PPT that I sent to you? Thank you.
All right. So they will have to be the one to do it. Huh?
Yes.
It doesn't move.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to show you. Can you hear me, my friends?
Yes, yes.
Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
my
Tony.
voice? All right. I'd like to share with you the situation now of this indigenous people community in Butong, municipality of Quezon in Bukidnon. Only yesterday and today we had the news that there was a shooting incident there when members of this community tried to enter their ancestral domain claim area in Butong, Quezon. And these are, do you see a picture here of their makeshift huts along the highway? And that is part of the problem that over the past 4 or 5 years, they have been along the highway because they were not allowed to enter into their ancestral domain claim area. The problem started actually much earlier with the Anglao community, Dato Rolando Anglao and his companions in the indigenous people community were laying claim to their ancestral domain area of more than 1,000 hectares. And actually, the area was being cultivated by the Chianti Development Corporation, headed now by Mayor Pauline Lorenzo of Quezon Municipality. But on December 31, 2018, the IFMA, or the pasture lease of the corporation, expired. And according to DENR and also the NCIP, it was clear that after the expiration of that lease, the land should go back to the ancestral domain of the Anglao clans. And that is part of the contention that after 4 years, they have not been able to reclaim their land. So in terms of food systems, the first right is not only the right to food, but the primary right for small farmers is the right to land. And this is an example of how the farmers peacefully were trying to enter after receiving their certificate of recognition as the rightful claimants from the National Commission on Indigenous People since last October 2021. And in fact, only last Monday, 2 days ago, there was a hearing at the Quezon Municipality Hall in order to try to clarify this. And NCIP Commissioner Alan Capuyan was there, side by side with Mayor Puling Lorenzo. However, and this is part of the problem, the NCIP chair did not indicate that he was ready to implement fully the entry of this Lumad community on the rightful claim after already 4 or 5 years of waiting. And so only yesterday, Tuesday, there was the attempt of this Lumad community to enter and legally into their area, but they were met by gunfire. And from the Blue Guards, there were 5 people who were wounded, who were hit. And part of the visitors that were there at that time was Mr. Leody de Guzman, one of the presidential candidates today. So the issue now has become nationwide. And I think it's just as well that we discuss it here, also in this webinar community, that the questions that are raised is really, how can the IPRA law, Indigenous People Rights Act, be fully implemented to help the Indigenous people communities attain their ancestral domain areas and to be able to provide food for themselves and the wider community. In fact, that is still part of the problem, that first, to reclaim the land. Again, we are told that even earlier, this group had already been able to reclaim parts of their land, and yet now they are still in a situation of not able to really provide enough means for support for the development of their communities. So I think that is the larger problem, in addition to just reclaiming their ancestral domain, is the next step is how to help the Indigenous people communities attain a better development model in order to ensure food security. One of their leaders mentioned earlier that the 2 factors that the Lumad communities usually have is they have so much land and they have so much manpower, and yet they're not able to produce enough food for themselves because they lack, in a sense, the capital, and they also lack perhaps the management skills in order to bring about their own food security. And this is where I think cooperatives can come in to help them gain the management skills to take care of their capital needs and to make them qualified to avail themselves of bank loans from government banks or private institutions or from NGOs. And actually, one example given now in our own discussion in the Lumad platform, which we have started here in discussing the problems of the Indigenous people communities over the past 6 months. One success story is that in Malaybalay, there is a group called Buktamako, the Bukidnon Tagaloan cooperative that is able to maintain their 1,000, initially 100 hectares by entering into inclusive business with agricultural corporation called Kenemer in cacao production. So in that sense, they're able to, inclusive business means that they're able to tie up with a corporation that can provide them with the technology And on their part, once they have formed a cooperative, they were able then to avail of a bank loan that enabled them to start the planting of the cacao seedlings, and now to try to gain some income from that. So it is in this sense, I think that there is some hope and some possibility of helping indigenous people communities if there is the proper combination of land area, manpower, and also on the other side, capital and technology and market that can be provided by a partner from outside. In this sense, the Lumad community are still able to retain ownership of their land, but in the other side, they're able to avail of the services and the management skills and know-how and technology of a partner corporation or NGO. So that is part of the problem, because looking back at the wider context of Bukidnon, we are told that over the past 6 years, there have been at least 91 killings of IP leaders, datus, and leaders of the IP communities, and many of these with impunity. There has been no justice that was given to the Lumad communities. And one partner in this advocacy, Mr. Orlando Rabanera, has been also trying to bring this up to the attention of the wider public. And so right now, in the sense that this news of the shooting has come out in the national papers, I think this is an opportune time for lawyers and also for NCIP and for government agencies themselves, as well as the church groups, to be able to bring up the question again of how the proper implementation of the Indigenous People Rights Act can first provide the ancestral domain claim of the IP communities, but going beyond that, also to help them in their development efforts by helping them set up viable cooperatives, and also perhaps tie up it through inclusive business with corporations that are able to extend help to them in terms of providing the market and the management skills. So it is with that, I think that I would like to leave behind the challenge to this group that food systems include, first of all, again, the right to land for small farmers. And many of the members of the IP community are really small farmers. But going beyond that, also how for them to increase their food production in terms of forming cooperatives that can avail now of production loans and can avail of access to markets by tying up with other corporations or NGOs that can be of help to them. And the example, I think, of Buk Tamako in Malaybalay is one concrete example that this can be done with a proper mixture of business on the one hand, helping now small farmer IP communities. So it is with that, I think that we can carry on the discussion later, but at this stage, we present the problem to you that the very first step, the right to land is being obstructed by corporations that are already there and do not want to honor the expiration of their lease to the land and to return the ancestral domain area to the rightful IP communities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Tony. I'd just like to remind the participants, if they have any questions or queries, they can put them in the chat box, and we can take them on during the open forum. And we can, once we are done with the first round of speaking. Thank you, Archbishop Tony, for that very enlightening presentation. Yes, indeed, in the headlines today, we saw in some of the newspapers that there was an allusion to this incident because President to be or wanting to be President Calyodi was in that group. No? Okay, now for the second discussant, let me introduce to you Ms. Samantha Claire Cayona. She is the incoming president of the Student Council of Ateneo de Davao University. The University Student Council is called the Samahan. She was previously the Secretary General last year, but for this coming school year, she is the incoming president. She has had experience in organizing a youth environment forum called the Eco Summit 2020 and 2021, with more than 300 youth advocates all over the country, came together to talk about environmental issues. She is also the executive director of Sibol Kidapawan, a youth organization in Kidapawan, North Cotabato, that aims to lead programs rooted in its three key advocacies: the environment, social awareness, and youth empowerment. She was also the chairperson of the Council of Class Presidents of Ateneo. And with that, I'd like to ask her to give her intervention. Ms. Cayona, please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, sir. I'd like to share my screen. Wait lang po. Ayan. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Maayong hapon sa tanan. I am Sam Cayona, Student Council President of Ateneo de Davao and an incoming fourth-year environmental science student. So my talk on the issue of human rights and the right to food will be through the lens of the environment. So disclaimer lang po muna, I am not an expert yet. So I'm still a student and I will just be sharing a few points that we've discussed in the classroom sa inyong lahat. So in our course in environmental science, it is always emphasized by our professors that the issues of the environment will always be linked to the issues on food. Ang issue ng kapaligiran ay may kaugnayan sa issue ng pagkain at ng agrikultura. All of us have the right to food, to clean and safe water and air, and all these are dependent on the health of our environment. Because of this, the fight for the environment will always be a fight for human rights. Ang laban para sa kapaligiran ay laban din para sa karapatang pantao. With immense environmental concerns and problems on how our resources are managed and controlled, until when can our environment support the needs of the population? Just last week, I'm sure some of you know about the protest of scientists in different parts of the world. So the hashtag Let the Earth Breathe trended all online worldwide after protests from NASA scientists and advocates from all over the world. According to their projections, humanity only has 3 years to change our ways to stop the irreversible effects of climate change. That's why they call for governments around the world to put up extreme policies to shift energy dependence to renewable kinds and make companies accountable for their immense negative environmental impacts. Nakakatakot isipin na ang climate projections ay hindi bunga ng science fiction. Instead, these are products of science and research, and today we are experiencing some of it, and our food production in this aspect is the most vulnerable. So in the recent research, for every degree Celsius global temperature increase, global mean rice yields will decline by 3.2 to 3.7%. This is a big blow to the Philippines, an agricultural country that is dependent on rice. Sa mas mainit na mundo, apektado ang crop production. So hindi lang rice, pati na rin ang mais, ibang mga wheat, and there are also researches na apektado din yung fruit bearing trees like rambutan, mga mangga, durian, etc. So nag-iiba-iba na yung weather patterns, yung rainfall patterns, kaya apektado din kung kailan namumunga yung iba't ibang mga fruit bearing trees. So aside from this, our country is also vulnerable to climate-induced hazards. And in this, our agri-fishery sectors are the most vulnerable. So despite the Philippines contributing only 0.3% of the world's total greenhouse gases emissions, we are the most vulnerable to climate-related hazards. For me, napaka-unfair nito. Kasi napaka-konti lang ng contribution ng Philippines to the greenhouse gas emissions, pero tayo yung may napakalaking nare-receive na negative impact from typhoons, from different calamities, no? And mas nagiging intense yung mga typhoon and mas marami nang pumapasok sa atin sa Philippines na mga malalakas na typhoons. So last week, we were hit by Typhoon Agaton and there were a lot of videos online showing how farmers were devastated of the typhoons. So napaka-weird din, if you noticed, na we're in the middle of summer, it's April, pero may bagyo sa Pilipinas. So these are products of the changes in weather patterns in the world. So these headlines show the damage of typhoons to the country. So last year, if you can recall, Typhoon Odette or Typhoon Rai devastated different areas in Visayas and some parts of Mindanao. So a lot of you might have known how Siargao was impacted. Their tourism industry was negatively affected by Typhoon Odette. And right now, they are still recovering, no? And napakalaki ng damage ng Typhoon Odette sa iba't ibang parte ng Visayas at Mindanao. And that farming and fishing industries were the most affected. And as you can see here, billions yung losses natin when it comes to the effects of these typhoons. And in this headline, it's emphasized here yung importation ng Pilipinas. Unfortunately, importation will never be sustainable. For example, we're in deficit of the supply of rice. Swerte tayo ngayon, we can import in different areas or different countries in Asia. But there will come a time, according to researchers, na nawala na ding supply yung ibang country. So where will we get our supply of rice? So importation will never be sustainable. Kaya sabi nga ni father earlier, it's very important that we invest on food security, that the Philippines is sustainable. Unfortunately, ito nga yung challenge para sa atin sa Pilipinas, no? Ang daming ang laki ng impact ng typhoons, ng environmental or ng climate-induced hazards sa atin, lalong-lalo na sa ating farming industry. So aside from food and on land, no, may food din tayo underwater. Of course, the fishes. Unfortunately, warmer oceans mean fewer fishes. In one of our discussions sa ecology class namin, our professor was discussing this research in Asia na marami sa mga fishes, they migrate to different areas because mainit na yung areas kung saan sila before. So they migrate to cooler areas. And so the fishermen have difficulty trying to figure out saan na yung mga fishes, saan na sila kukuha or sa harvest ng kanilang mga fish. So it is also a challenge, no? Warmer oceans mean fewer fishes. May challenge din sa fish kill. This is very common in Lake Cebu. You can research about it. Maraming mga fisher folks doon na nagkakaproblema kasi ang laki ng problem din ng fish kill at some parts of the year, no? Aside from that, there's also coral bleaching. I recommend that you watch the documentary Chasing Corals in Netflix to understand the issue more. But siguro to simplify, when we imagine underwater, di ba syempre colorful ng mga corals, di ba? But at certain point, kung masyado nang mainit, the polyps, yung organisms in the corals, they die. And so these corals, they lose their colors. So in effect, when they die, the fishes are also affected because the coral reefs are the areas where they breed. these are the areas parang subdivision nila, or um parang areas where they breed, where they take shelter, etc. So these are very important. So when they die, where will the fishes go? So it actually affects also the population of our fisheries. And yun, this is something na hindi pa masyado explored in the Philippines. Wala pa masyadong research on how coral bleaching affects our fish population right now. So, yun, I recommend for everyone to watch the Chasing Corals documentary in Netflix. Maraming mga scientists ang nagsa-study na ng coral bleaching in different parts of the world. But yun, sa Philippines, problema yung lack of data pa natin, yung information to explore the extent of effects of coral bleaching. So ilan lamang ito sa problema na kinakaharap natin when it comes to our food underwater. So right now,
I think naghang si Sam. Samantha, are you still with us? Seems that she's having problems with her internet, and but we have heard some of the key issues that she has raised. No? I hope she's able to rejoin us, but very quickly she looked at the issue of food production from an environmental perspective, and then the issue also of agri-fisheries, and as well as from the ocean, from marine fisheries perspective. And the last thing she mentioned was the coral bleaching, which she's saying still has to be further studied. All of these are very valid issues from an environmental perspective on the food and food production. She also mentioned how that mere importing food is also unsustainable. She mentioned that. So this is also a key issue that can be discussed, since in fact food importation in the Philippines is not limited to rice alone, as you have seen, that other aspects of food, other areas of food importation have been allowed by the government since last year. Let's say, for example, the issue of pork importation, partly because of African swine flu, and then the question of also importation of fish. You will recall there was a lot of galunggong and some other fish that is imported from China. And then there was also the issue recently of importation of sugar. The government has also allowed sugar importation when there is a lot of domestic production of sugar. So these are some of the government importation policies of the current administration, what has been done. I'm not sure if we're getting her back, but I think we can stop with that, as she has been able to expound on her key issues. Thank you very much for your input, Sam, and I hope you can come back and join us if your internet connectivity becomes more stable. So for now, we can pass on to our third webinar speaker, and she's known as Professor Amparita Santa Maria. She graduated in the Ateneo Law School, from Ateneo de Manila University, and took her master's or graduate studies as Masters of Law at the University of Toronto in Canada. She has since been a law faculty member of the Ateneo Law School since 1991, so a long-standing faculty member. and is currently the director of the Graduate Legal Studies Institute, as well as the Urdua Women's Desk of the Ateneo Human Rights Center. Professor Santa Maria is also a member of the Humanitarian and Human Rights Law Department of the Philippine Judicial Academy. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Professor Santa Maria to take the floor.
Okay, thank you. I will just share my screen. Okay, I think dapat nauna ko in the sense na I'm going to talk about the framing of the right to food and food security, no? Kasi that was what I parang yun yung comfort level ko. And I was asked to give a 5 to 7 minute talk. So I just thought that i-frame natin. So siguro yung sinabi kanina nung ibang speakers, uulitin ko, i-frame ko lang siya, no? So I'll start, no? Okay, so yung food security, no? You see the nomenclature is food security, no? It's hindi siya agad right to food, no? It's hindi agad framed as human right to food, no? So yung UN FAO uses the definition on food security adopted in the World Food Summit in 1996 and affirmed in the 2009 reform document. Okay, so the food security as a term, it used to focus on the only the adequacy of the food supply for consumption. But in 1996, the definition already focused on the importance of nutrition as an underlying determinant of health. And food security, of course, is also linked, no, to food safety, which is also linked to health. So you can see the practical application of the principle that human rights are interrelated. Okay, so is food security a human right? So how do we treat food security in order to better respond to this problem? Do we put it as a human rights issue? Is it a human right? No? Or are governments more threatened when you frame it as a human right? Or are they more comfortable with just the term food security? So Ziegler, the first UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food, has affirmed that the right to food is a human right because it protects the right of all human beings to live in dignity, free from hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition. So it's not about charity, but about ensuring that all people have the capacity to feed themselves in dignity. Okay. So even in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was already articulated, no? Yung right to food. And it has become a legal obligation under international law. Okay, so in 1966, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights was adopted, which provides a legal guarantee for the fundamental right to be free from hunger, as well as the progressive realization of the right to adequate food. Why progressive realization? Kasi hindi pare-pareho yung measurement ng kakayahan ng different countries who are parties to the convention. So, some countries are rich, some countries are already stable in terms of food security. So, yung economic, social, and cultural rights, sinasabi nila, there should be a progressive realization. It's not an excuse that you do not have the means. While it is not an excuse that you do not have the means to fulfill all these rights, you are parang given parang strategy that at least do not go back. No? It has to be a progressive realization. Kapag nandiyan na, hindi mo na pwedeng i-deny. And then the end goal is to progressively realize the economic, social, and cultural rights katulad ng right to food. Okay, so these general comments, no? General comments are explanation of the expert committee of the economic, social, and cultural rights in articulating what do the provisions in the ICE-SCR mean, okay? Kasi when we interpret human rights treaties, we also are progressive about it, which means yung pinirmahan nila noong 1966, okay? Hindi lang yun ang meaning, okay? Hindi lang yun ang meaning or we're stuck to the commitment in 1966. So continuously, the committee is interpreting, no, what the provisions mean, and therefore interpreting the mandate of the countries who signed the convention. Okay? So, the committee affirms that the right to adequate food is indivisibly linked to the inherent dignity of human person and is indispensable for the fulfillment of human rights. It is also inseparable from social justice, requiring the adoption of appropriate economic poverty and the fulfillment of all human rights. While the general comment in the right to health, no, general comment number 14, it says it is interpreted as extending not only to the timely and appropriate health care, but also to the underlying determinants of health, one of which is water and food, no? Sanitation, okay? Health, occupational, and environmental conditions, and access to health-related education and information, including on sexual and reproductive health. A further important aspect is the participation of the population, diba? So that they can own the programs. They can say that they have a stake, they're the real stakeholders, no, in all health-related decision-making at the community, national, and international levels. Okay. So what I did is to compare, no, the FAO's 4 dimensions of food security, and if you frame it as a right, as a human right under the ICE-SCR. So, yung dimension like for the FAO, the availability of sufficient quantities of food of appropriate quality, no? Supplied through domestic production or imports, including food aid. Now, when you say availability as a human right, in a human rights frame, it refers to quantity, quality, sufficient to satisfy the dietary needs of individuals, free from adverse substances. Okay? So, kailangan meron ding initiative from the government to ensure that the government, that the fertilizers and all the chemicals are safe, no, are not harmful. And they are acceptable within a given culture. Yun na nga. So, rice tayo, no? So, you cannot say, oh, the government has given you enough corn or enough wheat. Okay? Kailangan yung exercise natin ng food is culturally appropriate. San tayo masanay, ano yung kinakain natin, no? And then also, availability, ibig sabihin, pati processing and market systems, no? That can move food from the site of production to where it is needed in accordance with demand. So, syempre, papasok na rin dyan yung how accessible, no? How accessible is the food. Marami nga, hindi mo naman maabot. Wala namang kalye, kaya mahal din. You cannot afford it, di ba? Pero nandyan in terms of supply. So, yun yung essence ng availability. Now, access, according to FAO, okay, it means access by individuals to adequate resources for acquiring appropriate foods for a nutritious diet. So, in the term entitlements, they are defined as a set of all commodity bundles over which a person can establish command given the legal, political, economic, and social arrangements of the community in which they live. Now, accessibility, in human rights terms, it has to be economically accessible. Okay, acquisition of food for an adequate diet should be attained without the other basic needs being compromised. So again, it's interrelated and indivisible. Okay, So, hindi pwedeng, marami ka namang food. So, okay lang na wala kang adequate shelter. Di ba? Hindi pwedeng gano'n. O, marami ka na naman dole outs. So, wag ka nang humingi ng parang opportunity to be able to work. Yun ang nga sinabi kanina, di ba? Right to food, to be able to access it or obtain it in dignity, hindi dole out. Okay? And also, physical accessibility. Okay? Implies that adequate food must be accessible to everyone, especially vulnerable groups, including physically vulnerable individuals, such as infants and young children, elderly, the physically disabled, the terminally ill, and persons with persistent medical problems, including those with mental health conditions. Okay. So, utilization of food through adequate diet according to the pillars of FAO, okay, includes diet, adequate diet, clean water, sanitation, and healthcare to reach a state of nutritional well-being where all physiological needs are met. Okay. Now, for ICESCR, it recognizes the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living. Okay, so the determinants of the adequate standards of living include food, okay, to be free from hunger. So it includes the methods of production, conservation, and distribution. So yung mga hindi kasama sa rationing, no? So ano yon? Violation din yun ng right to food. Bakit ka ini-exclude? Is it because of your gender, your disability, your political belief? So if you are discriminated, for example, no? Lalo na nung nagka-COVID tayo, bakit hindi ka nabibigyan ng barangay? Or bakit yung iba meron, ikaw wala? No? Whenever an individual or group is unable for reasons beyond their control to enjoy the right to adequate food by the means at their disposal, now, states have the obligation to fulfill that right directly. This obligation applies for persons who are victims of natural and other disasters. Now, the last pillar is stability, no? To be food secure, a population, household, or individual must have access to adequate food at all times. Yun, kanina, inuulit-ulit yun, no? They should not risk losing access to food as a consequence of sudden shocks. For example, an economic or climatic crisis or cyclical events. The concept of stability can therefore refer to both availability and access dimensions of food security. Now, in ICESCR, the notion also is intrinsically linked to the notion of adequate food or food security, implying that food being accessible for both not only now, in the now, but also in the future generations. No? So the precise meaning of adequacy, to a large extent determined by prevailing social, economic, cultural, climatic, ecological, and other conditions, while sustainability incorporates the notion of long-term availability and accessibility. So in the COVID era, no, the right to adequate food was talagang challenge, no? The pandemic has demonstrated the importance of prevention, preparedness, access, and affordability of healthy diets. There is a need to adopt an integrated approach that pays closer attention to the linkage between food, health, and all human rights. Now, for children, okay, so as far as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it also emphasizes the child's highest standard of health. No? Yan yung article, no? 24 and 27, including adequate nutrition, which means food and water, shelter, and clothing. Okay. And since the invitation mentioned stunting, I just want to pose this as parang not a solution, but this is really a problem. No? I'm teaching gender and the law, and one of my students reported on the stunting problem also in BARM. No? So I'd like to parang throw this out, no, there in the webinar on focus on stunting. No? So the World Health Organization defines stunting as low height for age. It is the result of chronic or recurrent undernutrition usually associated with poverty, poor maternal health and nutrition, frequent illness, and or inappropriate feeding and care in early life. Stunting prevents children from reaching their physical and cognitive potential. So, in a study by World Bank entitled Undernutrition in the Philippines, childhood stunting is considered as one of the most serious but least addressed problems in the world and an even more pressing issue in the Philippines. And as mentioned a while ago, around 30% of children under 5 of age are stunted, considered high for its level of income and high compared to most of its neighbors. So the Philippines' rate of stunting places it fifth among countries in the East Asia and Pacific region with the highest stunting prevalence and among the top 10 countries globally with the highest number of stunted children. So according to the study, in some regions, the level of stunting exceeds 40% of children under 5 years of age. This is true in the Barm area, Mimaropa, Bicol, Western Visayas, and in rural areas, children are more likely to be stunted than their urban counterparts. So among the primary causes of undernutrition are poor infant and young child feeding practices, ill health, low access to diverse nutritious food, inadequate access to health services, unhealthy household environment, and poverty. So we have a law, Kalusugan at Nutrisyon ng Magnanay Act, no, RA 11148, hopefully in 2018. No? You can see there. And hopefully, this will help, no, especially in the Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition, where the target is to reduce the prevalence of child stunting from 33 to 21% by 2022. So that remains to be seen, no? With interventions focused on the first 1,000 days. So I'm citing a PEDS study. So why, and they in turn are citing the National Nutrition Council, no? The first 1,000 days of life refers to the period of pregnancy up to the first 2 years of the child. This period during which key health nutrition, early education, and related services should be delivered to ensure the optimum physical and mental development of the child. This is also the period which poor nutrition can have irreversible effects on the physical and mental development of the child, consequences of which are felt way into adulthood. Okay, so some of the challenges identified here by PIDS, no? For those yung na-identify nilang LGUs with high stunted children, there's difficulty or a challenge in aligning LGU priorities with achieving national targets, inadequate data collection, no, for priority setting, and limited local resources for investing in health and nutrition. So ADB also, they have many recommendations, pero I'm just putting there two, which is addressing the underlying determinants of undernutrition through a multi-sectoral effort. Kasi nga if you look at human rights, they are indivisible and they are interrelated. So kailangan yung effort multi-sectoral, so holistic, no? And ensuring that nutrition is one of the key priorities in the agendas of both the executive and legislative bodies in the municipalities. So I hope I have contributed something. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Santa Maria. It's been very focused and concise, no, your presentation, which we truly appreciate. You've been able to take us through the FAO policy brief on food security, which should really be understood, much more understood broadly by everybody, as well as some of the provisions in the International Covenant, Convention on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which has to be highlighted, especially those articles, and also as well as the articles on the health side, on the right to health. Also, we saw the problem of stunting, which is a real problem, no? Stunting and wasting actually, although we have a bigger number of stunted children. That's why we always feature prominently when who are the bottom countries in the world that have a high stunting rate, and the Philippines is always quoted, no? But it is really very disturbing what we've seen, that 1 out of 3 children in the Philippines is stunted, no? And this can really have we do not want to have a new generation of Filipinos who are second class, no? Because of they have not been fed adequately or nutritiously, especially in their first 1,000 days, no? The first 3 years of life, no? So thank you very much, Professor Santa Maria, for your inclusive discussion on the matter. So if there are, again, any questions on any of the 3 discussants, please include them in the chat box, and we will compile these and bring them up accordingly during the open forum. At this point, we'd like to we have received a message from the Chief of Staff of Attorney Chel Diokno that they are not able to connect also from where they are in Negros Oriental at the moment. And their proposal is to provide us with a video recording which can just be circulated to all the participants of this webinar, no? This is a most unfortunate situation, but it's not under our control. We have been assured that we would have participation from Attorney Chel Diokno, and that he would be able to give us a good input on the subject, no? However, given the situation, and we know also that the Philippines internet connectivity is not something to be proud of, meaning there's a lot more room for improvement. I'd like to keep it that way, no? I mean, since this is not under control, we will not have Attorney Chel Diokno's input this afternoon, but they have promised to send it. So we have over 400 people registered in this webinar, and of which about half are here. So what we would like to do is to just send you the link to the file that we will receive from Attorney Diokno's office, and make sure that you receive it, no? In the meantime, we will also put the proceedings of this recorded webinar so that it is also easily accessible to all of you and to the others, no, who are not here this afternoon. With that, I would like to suggest that we proceed to an open forum on the issues of the 3 discussants as they've been shared with us this afternoon. Also, we are still accepting questions for Attorney Diokno, which we can forward to his office, and hope that they can also address those subsequently. But for this afternoon, we've heard from three diverse perspectives. The first from Archbishop Antonio J. Ledesma, SJ, who showed us the plight of the indigenous people in Bukidnon, this Manobo tribe who is trying to gain access to their land, no? Which as part of the right to their land, which is in the legal, which is in the part of their ancestral domain. And we have seen how the company or the group behind is resisting that, no? But we can see that it is very important that the right to land and the right to food are so interrelated, no? Because access to land and access to food have to go hand in hand, no? Food production has to take root ultimately in the land, obviously. So we also saw that the farmers and the indigenous peoples there would benefit from a development paradigm, no? Sustainable food systems development paradigm, which can help the indigenous group, the tribal groups there, to be able to develop properly their land, as well as obtain more financial and technical resources, as well as access to market. No? We've seen that in Archbishop Tony's presentation. From Sam Kayona, we also saw that it is important that we look at food and food security from an environmental perspective, and that because they're all interrelated, no? The environment, the food, nature, and the impact on the environment are critical, no? So she was telling us that in a few years, if transformation is not achieved, greenhouse gas emissions will go up, and the climate, the heating up of the temperature in the climate, no, will increase, and that can have an impact on actual production. No? She cited rice production, which could go down by from 3 to 3.5 or 3.7% decrease, and then she also showed us that for agro fisheries, no, that we are also absorbing a lot of the negative impacts, as well as also for fish in the oceans. No? The fewer fishes, or the fish migrate actually to cooler climates, so it's becoming a problem for food security. And then she also pointed out the issue of coral bleaching. No? Although these are new areas which really need more study and more data, no? We have to see the outputs, the impacts, and on the environment. No? She also discussed the issue of food importation, which is unsustainable, as she hearing it from her own words. And this lack of sustainability we see in different aspects. No? Importation of rice, importation of pork, importation of even chicken at one point, and recently importation of sugar. No? Because all these have an impact, obviously, on domestic production. No? And so these are some of the issues raised so far, and we'd like to be able to hear and see if there have been questions raised from the chat box. Kin, will you be able to assist us and bring out some of the questions that have been raised so far?
Hello, yes, I have gathered some questions here, and as we can field this to Attorney Chel Diokno, if our discussants would want to join us also for this open forum, they may answer some questions, because I think in the chat box, some of the questions were fielded to you as well. So maybe we have time for a few questions. I have here one from Miss Christian Oriana. I think this is fielded to Professor Ampi, but anyone can answer. What are your thoughts on the inclusion of panatang makapalay in the flag ceremonies in schools?
Yeah, I think hindi naman siguro siya substitute do sa panatang makabayan, no? Kung dagdag siya. Maganda 'yun kasi I think that was also endorsed dahil gusto nilang emphasize for that particular period of time yung kahalagahan ng palay ng ating agriculture. So it's parang maganda siyang practice. Kung halimbawa every month meron tayong ginugunita. For example, March, no, it's International Women's Day, so pwede ka rin sa yung idadagdag mo sa iyong pledge ay tayo ay magiging support natin ang women empowerment or hindi natin isusulong yung karahasan laban sa babae. Tapos pag December, Migrant Workers Day naman. So I think it's a good practice that, especially in schools, that they are given a specific focus on a certain period of time to just raise their awareness, no, sa mga issues na outside probably sa pinag-aaralan nila, pero at least meron silang ginugunita na, oo nga, this is something which we can be conscious about. Yan.
Thank you, Prof.
Kin, are there other questions that have been fielded in the chat box?
Yes, there are quite a lot actually. This one is not fielded to anyone, but as the question is targeted to the youth, the question is from Anonymous. How can the youth be empowered to engage in human rights advocacy activities when red tagging is rampant nowadays, especially in social media?
Sam, you want to crack at that question?
Hello, sir. Can you repeat the question? Sorry, medyo putol-putol pa po on my end.
Oh, I'm sorry. How can the youth be empowered to engage in human rights advocacy activities when red tagging is rampant nowadays, especially in social media?
Well, the first step po, kung when I started to engage na to different events, different engagements, I started in just attending webinars and just attending these small events in my locality, in my barangay, in the organizations in our city, in Kidapawan. So, the first step of being empowered is to allow yourself to be empowered. So you engage, you start these conversations to people, you allow yourself to be educated through watching different videos online. That's where I started also getting into the environmental advocacy. So napakalaking problem din yung red tagging, and to be honest, it really intimidates a lot of people, no? But for me, when we, siguro example na lang sa experience ko, when we were fighting against this proposed mining in Tampakan in South Cotabato, kasi may advocacy kami. It's called Tayo Tayo para sa Tampakan. It's against the proposed mining, gold mining in Tampakan, South Cotabato. Marami din yung maraming mga messages na kami nare-receive na asking us to stop our campaign kasi baka kasi may mga threats to our security, ganun na lang. So may mga threats to our security. But what we did was we connected with different people. We consulted with lawyers who can protect us, who can advise us on what we can do legally, and also on what we can pursue also with our projects further, and in informing more of youth advocates and volunteers during the time on what to do in response to the threat. So wala pa naman akong na-experience na red tagging, but my close experience was that during our advocacy against mining in Tampakan. And what we did was we consulted with lawyers, we consulted with experts who can help us with advices on how we can respond to these issues. So yun yung experience ko and yung ginawa namin during that time.
Thank you, Sam. Archbishop Tony, would you like to add to that, or?
Yes, in fact, in this present situation of the IP community in Butong, during the hearing with the mayor there and the NCIP chair, it was brought up also in a implication way by mayor that the protesting IP communities may be infiltrated, and that therefore there is some kind of red tagging of the whole community. And that in itself is certainly a slur on the meaning of, first of all, it's a diversion of the real issue about the claim to ancestral domain. And in a sense, the rightful owners here should make clear that they are there without using any arms, and they are protesting in a legitimate way, and in a sense that should be acknowledged and recognized by everyone. That's why they're now asking also even for the military presence there to be sure that there is no violence against them. So I think, yes, red tagging can be a barrier to food security. But on the other hand, the real culprits here are those perhaps who are bringing out the tagging instead of the ones that are working for food security.
Yes, thank you, Archbishop. Professor Ampi, do you have any views on this? Or
Yeah. Well, we have kasi an internship program, no, in Ateneo Human Rights Center, and since Ateneo one, parang nareg-tag siya dati. So parang mas naging inquisitive yung mga military dun sa areas kung saan pumupunta yung aming mga interns. And tama yung sabi ni Sam na it has a chilling effect, no? Pero yun na nga, usually yung Human Rights Center kasi pagka halimbawa merong mga ganyang problema, yung kung may available na tinatawag na QRT, no? Quick Reaction Team, para matulungan yung mga may tanong. So parang makikita mo dito the importance of knowing the law, no? Kasi at least armed ka na kung ma-confront ka rin. And sometimes they also back out a little pagka alam nilang, uy, hindi natin to pwedeng just takutin, no? Because they know their law. So parang ganun. And from a human rights perspective, again, the obligation of the state is not only, again, to protect you against state agents, no? But also people who might harm you in the exercise of your rights. So it has a vertical and horizontal aspect. So hindi pwedeng sabihin nila na, hindi naman kami ang nangharang sa inyo, nangharas. It's a private person. But, when you exercise your right, you have the right to believe that I can exercise this freely without any interference. First, from the state, and second, from people who want to harm you. So, pati yun, obligation din yun ng Estado. So, tama yung sabi ni Sam, pag-aralan natin mabuti kung paano yung rights natin naka-frame talaga sa human rights, kasi iba talaga yung alam mo. I think naglalakad ka pa lang and you know what your rights are. Kahit papaano medyo maiibsan yung fear, yung parang chilling effect, and kahit papaano you are armed with a knowledge, no? That's why information is also a human right, with the knowledge of your rights and that what the obligation of the states are in your favor, di ba? Ano yung pananagutan nila kapag may nangyari sa iyo?
thank you very much, Professor Santa Maria. And so I think we have had very good responses from our three panelists on this issue. Kin, is there another question that has been fielded, or?
Yes, maybe we have time for maybe one more question, as it is already 4:33 p.m. Okay. Maybe we can take this question from Mr. Oliver Oliveros. Okay, it's quite a long question, but let me read it. Making nutritious food available for all is a challenge. While new technologies are being used to enhance nutrient content of some staple foods, such as biofortification or resorting to mass production of foodstuff. However, such practices meet strong opposition from some sectors, saying these options are not necessarily environment friendly nor healthy. From a right to food perspective, how can we reconcile short-term and pressing needs of feeding millions of people and the longer-term aspiration of ensuring a healthier environment? So I think the question is really is mainly talking about environmental friendly practices. And if anyone would want to have a crack at answering Mr. Oliver's question.
Archbishop Tony, do you want to start?
I could venture by saying that this is also related to the movement for sustainable agriculture, but also for organic or natural agriculture. And that in the long run, many people now say that organic agriculture is really the way to help create a healthier society instead of relying on maybe genetically modified organisms or chemical-based agriculture that could endanger in the long run the health of the population. So it's a matter of balancing, as the question itself puts it, short-term goals or long-term effects of organic agriculture and sustainable development. I myself would feel that we should move into that idea of organic agriculture in the same way that we're also moving into climate change possibilities, like shifting from fuel-based kind of production to more sustainable sources of energy that we can tap. And I think the Philippines has a lot of natural resources that we can depend on for this.
Okay. Sam, do you have any views on this?
Hello, sir. To add sa input po ni Mr. Antonio Ledesma, siguro for the youth who are here, I think it's best that we take the time to discern who are we going to elect this May 9, because I think we need more leaders who can advance the idea of environmental protection in our policies and programs in the Philippines. And so far, konti pa lang yung mga leaders natin na very vocal on food security, on organic agriculture, on pursuing this balance sa agricultural sector natin. So I think we need to invest more on studying where we going to vote this May 9, because our votes will be very important. So yun lang po.
Thank you, Sam. Professor Santa Maria?
Well, may napanood ako dun sa BBC kasi yung gera ngayon sa Ukraine and Russia, di ba, they produce most of the wheat in the world. Tapos parang and yung oil and gas, parang tinatanong yung Norway, why aren't you producing more for Europe? Ang sinabi nila, because we are producing it in a sustainable manner. So, parang sabi nga ni Father, it's balancing of interest kasi you cannot produce more if you want it to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly. And daw, sabi nila, so, paano, mauurong ba yung parang move against coal, because Germany and I think another country in Europe has already said that they might go back to coal. So, yun yung hazards talaga, and parang you juxtapose that with how many will suffer if you do not produce the right quantity and the amount for a certain period of time, as against how long can you sustain that and how yung harmfulness sa environment. I don't have the answer, but it's really a balancing of interest. And pero yung leader na sinasabi ni Sam, kailangan talaga makita niya na it's a balancing of interest, no? Hindi lang may tunnel vision siya na ito lang, wala akong pakialam dun sa ibang aspects. So yon, mahalaga yon na may ganung kang klaseng pananaw para yung decision mo rin is calculated, no, for the benefit of the majority of the people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I think Kin has informed us that our time for the open forum is done, since we have limited time. So I'd like to thank the three discussants for their inputs. I've already tried to highlight some of their issues previously, so I don't think we need another synthesis on this point. So perhaps what I'd like to do now is just to remind people that we will do two things. One is that the recording of this video will be made publicly available. It will be in the public domain. We can send it to all the registered participants, as well as those who, we will also put it on the Facebook page of the group. And then we will also be sending you the link to the video message of Attorney Chel Diokno, who unfortunately could not join us this afternoon because of internet connectivity problems from Negros Oriental. We sincerely apologize for this, but it's beyond our control. But the Chief of Staff of Attorney Diokno assured us that we should be receiving it quite soon, as the recording, no? So that we are able to share it with all of you. And again, we will send this out to everyone. Now, so perhaps I'd like to, I have not really prepared any closing remarks, but I'd just like to again thank the community, no? Especially the Ateneo de Manila University, the Ateneo de Davao University, the Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network of the Philippines for organizing this webinar. We'd like to thank our three very informative discussants this afternoon. Archbishop Antonio J. Ledesma, SJ, Archbishop Emeritus of Cagayan de Oro, for his presentation and insights. We'd like to thank Sam, or Samantha, as she's called, Kayona, for her experience as a student organizer doing confronting ecological issues, and pointing to us some of the pressing issues that we should look at in the short term and in the long term. And we'd like to also give our thanks to Professor Amparita Santa Maria of the Ateneo Law School and the Ateneo Human Rights Center for giving us a comprehensive and detailed view of the food security policy and the International Convention on the Economic, Cultural, and Social Rights discussions on the issue, which provided a very detailed and a very focused discussion on the subject. No? We are most grateful to them for their generosity in terms of their time and their talent in sharing this with us. And we would like to invite everybody to fill up the post-assessment form so that an e-certificate can be issued to you. It is contained there in the chat box. No? And we'd like to thank Kin in assisting us in moderating raising all the questions for the open forum this afternoon. So on behalf of the working group on SDG number 2, we'd like to thank all of you for your participation this afternoon. And we'd like to also ask all of you to vote, to think properly and vote wisely for the May 9 elections. We have exposed you to a series of issues over the last 3 months, hopefully to help enlighten and inform your decisions when you go out and vote. Every vote counts, as we know, and we hope that this series of food systems webinars which are going to be available and are already available in the public domain, can continue to, pwede niyong balikan to, no? You can look back at some of these issues in the process. No? So without further ado, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and please look out for our future webinars. No? We are hoping we will be able to mount one in June, but we still have to discuss it. So thank you very much and good afternoon, everybody. Ken, back to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this third in our webinar series.
Meron ba raw group photo? May nagtatanong.
uh, Unfortunately, since we don't have Atty. Chel here, maybe we can save the group photo if ever he would come.
Okay,
Okay.
fair enough. Sige, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, sa ating lahat. And good afternoon, everyone. Please join our Facebook group, Food Systems Community Dialogues. This is how the page looks like. And so that you can also have access to the recordings, no? Or even the previous recordings of all the previous webinars we've organized since the first one in April 2021, no? The Independent Dialogue for the Food Systems Summit, which was our first event. Thank you. Good afternoon to all.